Dr. Sarah Chen pressed her palm against the transparent barrier that separated her from the creature she had come to know as Zephyr. The alien's three-fingered hand mirrored her gesture on the other side, their palms almost touching through the energy field that hummed with a soft blue glow. "Why?" Zephyr's voice came through the translation device, carrying an emotion that transcended species barriers. The sadness in that single word made Sarah's chest tighten.
"Why are we forbidden to touch humans?"
Sarah had been expecting this question for weeks. As the lead xenobiologist on Station Aurora, she had spent countless hours studying the Kythera delegation. Zephyr, whose real name was an impossible series of harmonic frequencies, had become her primary subject of study. But somewhere along the way, the clinical relationship had evolved into something resembling friendship. The Kythera were unlike anything humanity had ever encountered. Standing nearly 8 feet tall, their bodies were composed of what appeared to be living crystal formations that shifted and changed color based on their emotional states. Right now, Zephyr's crystalline structure pulsed with deep purples and blues. Colors Sarah had learned indicated profound melancholy. "The Council's orders are very specific," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. She hated giving this answer, but protocol was protocol. No physical contact between our species until the full biological compatibility studies are complete. Zephyr's head tilted, the crystal formations along their skull catching the station's artificial light. "But you have studied us for 3 months now. Surely you know whether our touch would harm you?" Sarah bit her lip. The truth was, they did know. The biological scans had been conclusive weeks ago. The Kythera posed no infectious disease risk to humans, and vice versa. Their crystalline skin was actually quite warm to the touch according to the remote sensors and completely safe. But there were other concerns, ones that the Galactic Council had classified at the highest levels. "It's complicated," Sarah said, wishing she could tell Zephyr everything. The real reason for the prohibition wasn't biological safety. It was fear. Pure, simple fear of what might happen when two species capable of forming deep emotional bonds were allowed to connect physically. The Kythera had a unique ability that had been discovered early in first contact protocols. When they touched another sentient being, they could share emotions and even memories through a process their scientists called harmonic resonance. The Galactic Council, dominated by species that prized emotional control and logical thinking, had deemed this ability too dangerous for widespread contact. Zephyr moved closer to the barrier, their crystal formations now shifting to a soft amber glow. "In my culture, touch is how we truly know another being. Without it, we can only ever be strangers." Sarah felt tears welling up in her eyes. She had grown genuinely fond of Zephyr over their daily conversations. The alien had a curious mind and a gentle soul that reminded her why she had become a xenobiologist in the first place. The idea that bureaucratic fear was keeping them from truly connecting felt like a personal injustice. "What would happen if we touched?" Sarah asked, voicing the question that had haunted her thoughts for days. Zephyr's colors shifted to a warm golden hue. "For my species, it would be like finally seeing color after a lifetime of blindness. We would share a moment of perfect understanding. Your emotions, your memories would become temporarily mine, and mine yours. It is the deepest form of communication possible." "And that scares them," Sarah said, understanding flooding through her. "The council members, they're afraid of that level of connection." "Yes," Zephyr replied sadly. "They fear that such bonds would compromise their objectivity, that trade agreements and territorial disputes would become impossible if negotiators truly understood each other's hearts." Sarah looked around the observation room. She was alone except for Zephyr, the night shift skeleton crew busy with their own duties. The security cameras could be temporarily disabled for maintenance purposes. She had the access codes. "What if I told you that some humans don't share the Council's fears?" Sarah asked quietly. Zephyr's entire body began to glow with soft, pulsing light. "I would say that such humans give me hope for both our species." Sarah walked to the control panel, her heart racing. What she was contemplating could end her career, maybe even land her in a council prison. But looking at Zephyr's hopeful expression, she realized some things were more important than protocol. "The maintenance cycle for the security systems begins in 10 minutes, she said, not looking directly at Zephyr. "It lasts exactly 15 minutes. During that time, there would be no official record of what happens in this room." Zephyr understood immediately. "And the containment field?" "Could theoretically experience a temporary malfunction during the same maintenance window." Sarah's fingers hovered over the controls. But if that were to happen, and if two beings were to accidentally make contact during that malfunction, it would be completely unintentional. An unfortunate oversight. The aliens' crystal formations began shifting through a rainbow of colors. What Sarah had learned was the Kythera equivalent of laughter and joy. How very unfortunate that would be. Sarah initiated the maintenance protocol, her hands shaking slightly. As the security systems went offline one by one, she felt a mixture of terror and excitement. She was about to become the first human to experience direct contact with a Kythera, to understand what it truly meant to connect with an alien consciousness. "Are you ready?" she asked, her finger poised over the containment field controls. "I have been ready since the day we met," Zephyr replied, their voice filled with warmth and anticipation. Sarah took a deep breath and pressed the button. The barrier flickered and died. For the first time in 3 months, nothing stood between human and alien except empty air and the courage to bridge the gap between two worlds. Zephyr stepped forward slowly, extending their 3-fingered hand. Sarah reached out to meet them, her heart pounding with the knowledge that everything was about to change, not just for her and Zephyr, but potentially for the entire relationship between their species. The moment before their hands touched, Sarah wondered if the Council's fears were justified. But looking into Zephyr's kind eyes, she decided that some connections were worth the risk. The moment their skin made contact, Sarah's world exploded into sensation. It wasn't painful, but it was overwhelming in a way she had never experienced. Warmth spread from the point where Zephyr's crystalline fingers touched her palm, racing up her arm and through her entire nervous system. Then came the emotions, not her own but Zephyr's, flooding through her consciousness like a gentle tide. She felt the aliens' wonder, their joy at finally making contact, their deep loneliness that had characterized months of barrier-separated interaction. But underneath it all was something else, something that made Sarah gasp with recognition. Love. Not romantic love, but something deeper and more universal. The profound affection that one conscious being could feel for another, transcending species, biology, and evolution itself. Through Zephyr's consciousness, Sarah experienced memory fragments that took her breath away. She saw Zephyr's homeworld, a place of impossible beauty where crystal cities grew from living mountains and harmonious songs echoed through caverns of light. She felt Zephyr's childhood, surrounded by family members whose touch created constant communion of thought and feeling. But she also experienced Zephyr's first encounter with humans, the clinical examination rooms, the cold metal instruments, the well-meaning but distant scientists who studied them like an interesting specimen, the crushing loneliness of being the only member of their species to volunteer for this cultural exchange, cut off from the touch-based communication that was as natural to them as breathing. Sarah opened her eyes, realizing she had closed them without knowing it. Zephyr's crystal formation had turned a brilliant white gold, pulsing gently with each shared heartbeat. Their eyes met, and Sarah understood that the communication was flowing both ways. Through their connection, she could feel Zephyr experiencing her memories. Her childhood on Earth, running through green fields under a yellow sun, her years of study, driven by an insatiable curiosity about life beyond her world, her first glimpse of the stars from a spacecraft, the moment when the universe had truly opened up to her. But Zephyr was also experiencing her more recent emotions. Her frustration with the Council's rigid protocols, her growing friendship with the alien despite the barriers between them, her genuine respect for Kythera culture, and her anger at how it was being dismissed by bureaucrats who saw only potential problems. "Your species," Zephyr's voice came through both the translator and directly into her mind, "is more remarkable than you know." Images flowed between them. Sarah saw herself through Zephyr's perception, but also through the eyes of the other Kythera delegates. To them, humans were a species of incredible contradictions. Physically fragile yet impossibly brave, emotionally volatile yet capable of profound compassion, technologically advanced yet still driven by the same basic needs for connection and understanding that motivated all intelligent life. "We had heard stories," Zephyr continued, their thoughts mixing with Sarah's own. "Other species told us that humans were dangerous, that you conquered and consumed everything in your path, that you were too violent, too unpredictable to be trusted with the deeper forms of communication. Sarah felt a flash of shame as she experienced how other alien species perceived humanity. The Zephyrians, with their obsession with order and hierarchy, saw humans as chaotic and destructive. The crystalline collective viewed human emotions as primitive and uncontrolled. Even the peaceful Verdani considered humans too aggressive for meaningful contact. But they are wrong. Zephyr's consciousness wrapped around hers like a warm embrace. Through your mind, I see what drives your species. Yes, you can be violent when threatened. Yes, you can be unpredictable when passionate. But underneath it all is something that many of the elder species have lost. What? Sarah asked, both aloud and through their connection. Hope, Zephyr replied. Unlimited, unreasonable, magnificent hope. You believe that tomorrow can be better than today, that problems can be solved, that differences can be bridged, that understanding can triumph over fear. Even now you risk everything just to make contact with a being from another world. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face as she experienced Zephyr's perspective on humanity. Through their shared consciousness, she saw her species not as the galactic newcomers struggling for acceptance, but as something precious and rare in a universe where most civilizations had become comfortable with isolation. The other species fear your potential, Zephyr continued. They see what you might become if you continue to grow and explore and reach out to others. You represent change in a galaxy that has become static. New memories flowed through their connection. Sarah saw the Galactic Council chambers through Zephyr's eyes, witnessing debates she had never been allowed to attend. She watched as species after species spoke against deeper human integration, citing humanity's instability and unpredictability as reasons to maintain strict contact protocols. But she also saw the few voices that spoke in humanity's defense. The ancient Luminari, beings of pure energy who remembered when they too had been young and reaching for the stars. The nomadic wanderers who valued exploration and discovery above security and control. And, surprisingly, a faction within the Kithra themselves who believed that connection with humanity might revitalize their own stagnating culture. This is why the touch prohibition exists, Sarah realized. The full scope of the political situation becoming clear through their shared awareness. It's not about biological safety. It's about preventing exactly this kind of understanding. Yes, Zephyr confirmed. If our species truly knew each other, if we formed the kinds of bonds that touch sharing creates, it would change everything. Treaties based on fear and misunderstanding would crumble. New alliances would form based on genuine affection and mutual respect. Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. This moment of connection wasn't just between her and Zephyr. It was potentially the beginning of a new chapter in galactic politics. If they could prove that human-Kithra bonding was not only safe but beneficial, it might open doors that had been closed to humanity for decades. But it also meant that discovery of their unauthorized contact could have consequences far beyond her own career. The hardline factions within the council would use it as evidence that humans couldn't be trusted to follow protocols, that they were indeed too unpredictable for deeper integration. Are you afraid? Zephyr asked, sensing her growing anxiety through their connection. Sarah considered the question seriously. Yes, she was afraid of the consequences, afraid of the responsibility, afraid of failing not just herself but her entire species. But stronger than the fear was something else. No, she said finally, I'm not afraid. Because for the first time I truly understand what we're fighting for, not just humanity's place in the galaxy, but the possibility of something better than what exists now. Through their connection, she felt Zephyr's agreement and determination. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. The barrier between their species had been broken, and neither of them wanted to see it rebuilt. The maintenance cycle ended too soon. As the security systems began their restart sequence, Sarah and Zephyr reluctantly broke their connection. The loss of the shared consciousness hit Sarah like a physical blow, leaving her feeling incomplete and strangely cold despite the station's regulated temperature. The memories will fade, Zephyr said softly, their crystal formations dimming to a gentle blue glow, but the understanding remains. Sarah nodded, touching her palm where Zephyr's hand had been. She could still feel an echo of their presence like a song heard from far away. What do we do now? Before Zephyr could answer, alarms began blaring throughout the station. Emergency lights bathed the laboratory in red, and the automated voice system crackled to life. Security breach in Xenobiology Lab 7, all personnel to emergency stations. This is not a drill. Sarah's blood turned to ice. Someone had been monitoring the systems more closely than she had realized. The maintenance window had provided cover from the official security logs, but clearly other detection methods were in place. Dr. Chen. Commander Harrison's voice echoed through the corridors, growing closer. Dr. Chen, respond immediately. Sarah looked at Zephyr, panic rising in her chest. The alien's expression was calm, but their color had shifted to a deep purple that she now knew indicated resignation and sadness. I'm sorry, she whispered. I've ruined everything. No, Zephyr replied firmly. You have begun everything. The laboratory doors hissed open and Commander Harrison stormed in with a full security detail. His face was flushed with anger and what looked like genuine fear. Behind him came Dr. Marcus Webb, the station's chief administrator. His expression carefully neutral, but his eyes hard as ice. Step away from the containment area. Dr. Chen, Harrison ordered, his hand resting on his sidearm. Immediately. Sarah raised her hands and moved toward the center of the room. The containment field had already reactivated automatically, once again separating her from Zephyr. The aliens stood perfectly still, their crystalline structure now showing swirling patterns of silver and black. Commander, Dr. Webb said quietly, please secure Dr. Chen and escort her to detention. We'll need a full medical scan and debriefing. Wait, Sarah said, finding her voice. Let me explain what happened. What happened, Dr. Webb replied coldly, is that you deliberately violated direct orders from the Galactic Council. You compromised not just your own safety, but potentially the safety of this entire station and the diplomatic mission we're conducting here. Sarah wanted to tell them about the connection she had shared with Zephyr, about the understanding that had passed between them, about the political fears that were keeping the species apart. But looking at their faces, she realized they wouldn't understand. They couldn't understand without experiencing it themselves. The contact was safe, she said instead. No biological contamination, no physical harm. The prohibition isn't based on legitimate safety concerns. That's not for you to decide, Commander Harrison snapped. You're a scientist, not a diplomat. You don't get to make policy decisions that affect interspecies relations. As the security team moved to restrain her, Sarah caught sight of Zephyr through the containment field. The alien was watching the proceedings with what she had learned to recognize as deep concentration. Their crystal formations were cycling through rapid color changes, a pattern she had never seen before. Suddenly, Zephyr pressed both hands against the containment field and began to emit a low, harmonic sound. The frequency seemed to resonate through the station's hull, creating a vibration that Sarah could feel in her bones. What's it doing? Harrison demanded, drawing his weapon. Don't, Sarah shouted. They're not threatening anyone. The harmonic sound grew stronger, and Sarah realized what was happening. Zephyr was calling to the other Kithra delegates aboard the station. The resonance was a form of long-distance communication, one that could penetrate the barriers and containment fields that kept the species separated. Within minutes, the laboratory filled with new arrivals. The 3 other Kithra delegates materialized in the corridors, having somehow bypassed the station's security systems. Their crystalline forms glowed with synchronized patterns of light, and they moved with a unity of purpose that was both beautiful and intimidating. This is a restricted area, Dr. Webb said, but his voice lacked conviction. The sudden appearance of the aliens had clearly shaken him. The lead Kithra delegate, whom Sarah knew as Echo, stepped forward. Unlike Zephyr's more subdued coloring, Echo's crystal structure blazed with brilliant whites and golds. When they spoke, their words carried an authority that demanded attention. We invoke the right of testimony, Echo announced, their voice resonating through the translation systems. Under Article 12 of the First Contact Protocols, we demand to address the accusations against Dr. Chen and to present evidence relevant to this incident. Dr. Webb's face went pale. The right of testimony was an ancient provision that allowed alien species to intervene in legal proceedings that might affect diplomatic relations. It had rarely been invoked, but when it was, it carried the full weight of Galactic Council law. This is a human internal matter, Webb protested weakly. No longer, Echo replied. Dr. Chen's actions directly involved our species. We have the right to speak on her behalf and to present our perspective on the events that have occurred. Commander Harrison looked confused. What perspective? She broke protocol and made unauthorized contact. The facts are clear. Echo's crystal formation shifted to a pattern of deep blues and greens. What Sarah had learned indicated profound seriousness. The facts as you understand them are incomplete. You judge Dr. Chen's actions based on laws created by fear and misunderstanding. We offer a different interpretation. Sarah watched in amazement as the 4 Kithera delegates arranged themselves in a semicircle around the containment area. Their crystalline structures began to pulse in unison, creating a light show that was hypnotically beautiful. But more than that, she could feel something building in the air around them, a kind of psychic pressure that made her scalp tingle. "What are they doing?" Harrison whispered, his weapon forgotten in his hand. Echo turned to address the humans directly. "We are creating a harmonic resonance field. Within this field, emotional deception becomes impossible. Truth resonates. Lies create discord. If you truly wish to understand what occurred between Dr. Chen and our colleague Zephyr, you must be willing to experience it as we do." Dr. Webb stepped backward. "Absolutely not. We're not submitting to any kind of alien mental influence." "Then you cannot fairly judge what has occurred," Echo replied simply. "You condemn Dr. Chen for an action whose true nature you refuse to understand." Sarah felt the resonance field intensifying around them. The sensation was similar to what she had experienced during her connection with Zephyr, but gentler, more controlled. She could sense the emotions of everyone in the room, could feel their fears and doubts and hidden motivations. "Commander." Harrison's anger was masking a deep uncertainty about his orders. Dr. Webb's apparent authority concealed genuine terror about the political consequences of this incident. The security personnel were confused and frightened by forces they didn't understand, but the Kithera delegates radiated something entirely different. Calm determination, profound sadness at the barriers between species, and underneath it all a deep affection for humanity that transcended the current crisis. "You see?" Echo said softly, their voice carrying clearly through the harmonic field. "We do not seek to harm or control you. We seek only to share truth. The question is whether you have the courage to receive it." The standoff in the laboratory stretched for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. Dr. Webb stood frozen, clearly weighing his options. The harmonic field created by the Kithera delegates continued to pulse around them, making everyone increasingly aware of the emotional undercurrents in the room. Finally, Webb made his decision. "Stand down," he ordered the security team. "But maintain position. We'll hear what they have to say." Echo's crystal formation brightened with what Sarah recognized as gratitude. "Thank you. What we share with you now may be difficult to accept, but it is necessary for understanding." The harmonic field intensified, and suddenly Sarah wasn't just feeling emotions, she was seeing images. The other humans in the room gasped as the Kithera delegates shared their collective memory of the past months aboard Station Aurora. Through alien eyes, Sarah watched herself during those first tense days when the Kithera delegation had arrived. She saw her own curiosity and genuine interest in their culture. So different from the clinical detachment of the other scientists, she witnessed moments she had forgotten, small gestures of kindness and respect that had meant far more to the aliens than she had realized. But she also saw the other side of human behavior on the station, the fear and suspicion that many crew members harbored toward the aliens, the whispered conversations about whether the Kithera could be trusted, the way some humans avoided the alien quarters entirely, unable to see past their crystalline appearance to the intelligent beings beneath. Commander Harrison staggered slightly as the full weight of the shared memories hit him. "This is impossible," he muttered. "You're making us see things that aren't real." "We cannot create false memories," Echo replied patiently. "The harmonic resonance only amplifies what already exists. What you see are our genuine experiences and perceptions." The images continued to flow. Sarah watched the Kithera delegates' growing frustration with the barriers that kept them separate from humans. She felt their loneliness, their desperate desire to truly communicate rather than exchange mere words through translation devices. Most powerfully, she experienced their genuine affection for individual humans they had come to know, despite the limited contact allowed by protocol. Dr. Webb was breathing heavily, his face pale with shock. "You're saying that everything you're showing us is real? That this is actually how you perceive us?" "Yes," Echo confirmed. "And now you will see why Dr. Chen's actions were not a violation to be punished, but a bridge to be celebrated." The scene shifted to show the moment when Sarah and Zephyr had first touched. But this time, Sarah experienced it from the perspective of all 4 Kythera delegates simultaneously. She felt their joy and wonder as Zephyr finally achieved the connection they had been longing for. She experienced their awe at the depth of human consciousness, the complexity of emotions and thoughts that flowed between the 2 species. Through their shared perception, she saw herself as the Kythera saw her, not as a rule-breaking scientist, but as a brave pioneer who had risked everything to build understanding between worlds. She felt their respect for her, courage, and their hope that her actions might finally break down the barriers that kept their species apart. But the most shocking revelation came when the Kythera shared their knowledge of the political situation surrounding the contact prohibition. Through their diplomatic networks, they had learned that the ban on physical contact had never been about biological safety. It was part of a deliberate strategy by several council species to limit human influence in galactic affairs. The images showed secret meetings where elder species discussed the human problem. They feared that humanity's natural charisma and ability to form deep emotional bonds would disrupt the careful power balance that had existed for millennia. If humans were allowed to make true connections with other species, particularly ones like the Kythera, who valued emotional bonds above political considerations, it would shift the entire dynamic of galactic politics. Commander Harrison sank into a nearby chair, overwhelmed by the revelations. You're telling us that the Council has been deliberately keeping us isolated? That all the safety protocols and cultural sensitivity training was just an excuse to limit our influence? Not the entire Council, Echo clarified. But a significant faction, yes. They see your species as a threat to the established order. Your tendency to form genuine friendships across species lines, your willingness to take risks for the sake of understanding, your refusal to accept that things must always remain as they have been. These qualities terrify them. Dr. Webb looked like he was going to be sick. As the station's chief administrator, he had been enforcing policies that he now realized were designed to handicap his own species. But why would you tell us this? Aren't you risking your own position with the Council? The 4 Kythera delegates exchanged what Sarah had learned to recognize as their version of meaningful glances. Their crystal formations shifted to synchronized patterns of gold and silver. Because, Echo said simply, we believe that the time has come to choose sides, not in the sense of conflict or war, but in choosing what kind of galaxy we want to live in. Do we want one where species remain forever separate? Where fear governs all interactions? Where understanding is sacrificed for the illusion of safety? Or do we want one where beings like Dr. Chen and Zephyr can reach across the void between worlds and touch souls? Zephyr stepped closer to the containment field, their colors shifting to warm blues and greens. The connection Sarah and I shared showed me something extraordinary. Human consciousness is not chaotic or dangerous as some species claim. It is vibrant and alive in ways that many of us have forgotten how to be. When our minds touched, I remembered what it was like to feel wonder at the universe, to believe that tomorrow could be different from today. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face as she experienced the profound impact their brief connection had made on Zephyr. Through the harmonic field, she could sense that the other Kythera delegates had been affected as well, simply by sharing Zephyr's memories of the experience. This is why the prohibition exists, she realized aloud. Not because physical contact is dangerous, but because the understanding it creates is transformative. The elder species aren't just afraid of losing political control, they're afraid of changing. Precisely, Echo confirmed. For centuries, our species have become comfortable with isolation. We have forgotten that the purpose of civilization is not merely to survive, but to grow, to explore, to become more than we were. Humans remember this. Through you, we can remember it too. The harmonic field began to fade as the Kythera delegates allowed their resonance to diminish. The laboratory felt strangely quiet after the intense shared experience, but the emotional connections that had formed remained. Commander Harrison stood slowly, his expression thoughtful. So what happens now? Even if everything you've shown us is true, I still have orders from the Council. I can't just ignore them. You can choose not to enforce them, Dr. Webb said quietly. Everyone turned to look at him in surprise. The administrator's face was set with new determination. The Council's orders were based on false premises. If the safety concerns were fabricated and the real purpose was political manipulation, then we have grounds to challenge the prohibition. That could mean the end of our careers, Harrison pointed out. Maybe worse. Maybe, Webb agreed. Or it could mean the beginning of something better. I've spent my entire career following orders without questioning their purpose. Today, for the first time, I've seen what those orders have cost us. I'm not willing to enforce them anymore. Sarah looked around the room at the faces of her colleagues and friends. She could see the fear and uncertainty in their eyes, but she could also see something else. Hope. The same quality that Zephyr had identified as humanity's greatest strength. Whatever we decide, she said, we decide together. And we decide knowing the full truth about what we're fighting for. 3 days after the revelation in the laboratory, Station Aurora buzzed with activity unlike anything its crew had ever experienced. Word of the Kythera delegates' testimony had spread throughout the station, creating ripples of excitement, fear, and determination among the human personnel. Sarah found herself at the center of the storm. What had begun as a simple moment of connection between two beings had evolved into something much larger. Dr. Webb had formally challenged the Council's contact prohibition, filing a complaint that cited both the fabricated nature of the safety concerns and the political manipulation behind the restrictions. The response from the Council had been swift and harsh. A special tribunal was being assembled to investigate not just Sarah's actions, but the entire contact program at Station Aurora. 3 Council ships were en route, carrying representatives from the species most opposed to deeper human integration. They're scared, Zephyr observed during one of their now daily conversations. The containment field remained in place officially, but Dr. Webb had quietly disabled most of its monitoring systems. Sarah could now touch the barrier without triggering alarms, though actual physical contact remained impossible. Of us? Sarah asked. Or of change in general? Both, Zephyr replied, their crystal formations shifting to thoughtful purples. Through our connection, you showed me something that I have been sharing with my people. Human consciousness is not just different from ours, it is infectious in the most wonderful way. Your passion for discovery, your refusal to accept limitations, your belief that problems exist to be solved rather than endured. These qualities spread to those who truly know you. Sarah pressed her palm against the barrier, wishing she could make contact again. The brief touch they had shared 3 days ago felt like a lifetime past, but the memory remained vivid. She could still recall the sensation of another consciousness joining with hers, the profound understanding that had passed between them. The other species are afraid that if we're allowed to make genuine connections, their own people will start questioning why things have to remain the same, she said. Exactly, and their fears may be justified. Zephyr moved closer to the barrier, their colors shifting to warm golds and oranges. Since our connection, the other Kythera delegates have been different, more curious, more willing to challenge our own cultural assumptions. The harmonic resonance we shared with your colleagues has awakened something in us that had been dormant for generations. Before Sarah could respond, her communication device chimed with an urgent message. Dr. Webb was requesting her immediate presence in the main conference room. When she arrived, she found the room packed with senior staff members, their faces grave with concern. The Council tribunal ships have arrived ahead of schedule, Webb announced without preamble. They're demanding immediate access to the station and all records related to the contact incident. But that's not the most significant development. He activated the main display, showing a star chart of the local sector. Red indicators marked the positions of dozens of ships converging on their location. We're receiving similar reports from contact stations throughout this sector, Webb continued. Apparently, word of what happened here has reached other species involved in human contact programs. Ships are converging from all directions. Commander Harrison leaned forward in his chair. What kind of ships? Council enforcement vessels? That's just it, Webb replied. They're not all Council ships. We're reading Kythera vessels, but also Wanderer exploratory fleets, luminary research platforms, even some ships from species we've never encountered before. It's like our little incident has triggered some kind of galactic response. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. What kind of response? The answer came from an unexpected source. Echo materialized in the doorway, having somehow bypassed the conference room's security systems entirely. The Kythera delegates' crystal structure blazed with urgent reds and oranges. The choice has been forced upon us, Echo announced. Word of the connection between Dr. Chen and Zephyr has spread beyond what we anticipated. Throughout the galaxy, species that have chafed under the Council's restrictions are seeing this as a symbol of possible change. Symbol of what? Webb asked. Revolution, Echo replied simply. Not violent revolution, but a fundamental shift in how species relate to each other. For too long, the galaxy has been governed by fear and separation. Your species represents the possibility of something different, and many beings have been waiting for an excuse to embrace that possibility. As if summoned by Echo's words, the conference room's communication system activated. The main screen filled with the image of a being Sarah had never seen before. Humanoid but composed of shifting light patterns rather than solid matter. "Greetings, Station Aurora," the being said, its voice somehow conveying warmth despite its ethereal nature. "I am Flux of the Luminary Collective. We have traveled far to witness what you have begun here." Dr. Webb found his voice first. "Witness what exactly?" "The breaking of chains that have bound this galaxy for far too long," Flux replied. "The Council's tribunal approaches with the intention of punishing those who dared to reach across the void between species. But they will find that they are no longer dealing with isolated incidents. What began as one human's courage to touch one Kythera has become a movement that spans star systems." The screen split to show multiple incoming transmissions. Sarah watched in amazement as representatives from dozens of species appeared on the display. Some she recognized from her xenobiology studies, others were completely unknown to her, but all of them shared a common purpose that was evident even across the barriers of translation and biology. "The Wanderer clans stand with Station Aurora," declared a being, whose form seemed to shift between solid and gaseous states. "We have always believed that the universe exists to be explored, not feared." "The crystal singers add our voices to yours," chimed a crystalline entity that bore some resemblance to the Kythera, but with structures that created actual musical tones. "For too long our songs have echoed in empty chambers. It is time for harmony between worlds, one by one." The species declared their support for what they were calling the Aurora Principle, the idea that meaningful contact between species should be encouraged rather than restricted. That understanding was worth the risks it might entail. Sarah watched the declarations with growing amazement and terror. What had started as her personal decision to reach out to Zephyr was becoming a galactic political crisis. The weight of responsibility was almost crushing. "This is happening because of me," she whispered to Echo, who had moved to stand beside her chair. "No," Echo replied, their colors shifting to gentle blues and greens. "This is happening because of all of us. You were simply the catalyst that allowed long-suppressed desires for connection to finally surface. Every species you see on these screens has been waiting for someone to take the first step." Commander Harrison stood abruptly. "This is insane. We're talking about defying the Galactic Council. Even if half the galaxy supports us, the other half doesn't. This could mean war. Or it could mean peace," said a new voice from the communication array. This time the speaker was clearly human, but speaking from what appeared to be another council station. "This is Captain Maria Santos from Contact Station Beta 7. We've been monitoring your situation, and I want you to know that you're not alone." The screen expanded to show additional human stations throughout the sector. Sarah realized that the events at Aurora had triggered responses at every human contact facility in the region. "We've had our own incidents," Captain Santos continued. "Nothing as dramatic as yours, but enough to make us question the restrictions we've been operating under. When word reached us about what Dr. Chen discovered, it confirmed suspicions we'd been harboring for months." Dr. Webb leaned forward intently. "What kind of suspicions?" "That the contact protocols weren't designed to protect us, but to contain us," Santos replied. "Several species have been requesting expanded contact with human facilities, only to be blocked by council bureaucracy. We've been told it was for our own safety, but the pattern suggested something else entirely." Sarah felt a surge of hope mixed with apprehension. If other human installations were experiencing similar issues, it meant the problem was systemic rather than isolated to Aurora. But it also meant the stakes were much higher than she had realized. "The tribunal ships will arrive within hours," Webb announced to the assembled group. "We need to decide how we're going to handle this. Do we submit to their authority and hope for lenient treatment? Or do we stand our ground and face the consequences?" "There's a third option," Echo interjected. "You could request formal mediation under the ancient protocols." Silence fell over the conference room. The ancient protocols were legendary provisions written into the original Galactic Council Charter. designed to handle disputes that threatened the fundamental structure of interspecies relations. They hadn't been invoked in over 1,000 years. That would require support from at least a dozen council species, Harrison pointed out. Do we have that kind of backing? Echo's crystal formation began to pulse with rhythmic patterns of light. Watch, they said simply. The communication screen filled with new incoming transmissions. But these weren't. The ancient mediation chamber materialized around Station Aurora, like something from a dream. The massive structure, larger than most space stations, had been constructed by the combined efforts of dozens of species over the course of several weeks. Its crystalline walls seemed to pulse with their own inner light, creating an atmosphere that was both majestic and peaceful. Sarah stood at the center of it all, still struggling to comprehend how her simple act of reaching out to touch Zephyr had led to this moment. Representatives from nearly every known species in the galaxy filled the chamber's tiered seating areas. The sight was overwhelming, beautiful, and terrifying all at once. The ancient protocols have not been invoked for 1,237 standard years, announced the Arbiter, a being of pure energy, whose form shifted between different geometric patterns. The matter before us today concerns not just the actions of one individual, but the fundamental principles that govern relationships between species. The chamber fell silent as the Arbiter's words echoed through the space. Sarah could feel the weight of thousands of eyes upon her, some friendly, some hostile, all intensely curious about the human who had triggered this unprecedented gathering. Dr. Sarah Chen, the Arbiter continued, you stand accused of violating Council Protocol 17 by making unauthorized physical contact with a member of the Kythera species. How do you answer these charges? Sarah took a deep breath, drawing strength from the presence of Zephyr in the section reserved for the Kythera delegation. Her friend's crystal formations glowed with supportive colors, and she could almost feel their encouragement across the space between them. I do not deny that I made physical contact with Zephyr, Sarah said, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustic systems, but I deny that this contact was unauthorized in any meaningful sense. A murmur ran through the assembled representatives. This was not the simple admission of guilt they had expected. Explain, the Arbiter commanded. Sarah stepped forward, addressing not just the Arbiter, but the entire assembly. The prohibition against physical contact between humans and Kythera was presented to us as a safety measure, necessary to prevent biological contamination or psychological harm. We now know that this justification was false. The real purpose of the prohibition was political control, designed to prevent exactly the kind of understanding that physical contact makes possible. These are serious accusations, interjected Counselor Vex of the Hegemony faction, one of the species most opposed to human integration. Do you have evidence to support these claims? I do, Sarah replied. But more than evidence, I have experience. When Zephyr and I touched, we shared consciousness in a way that words cannot adequately describe. In that moment, I understood not just Zephyr culture, but their genuine affection for humanity. I experienced their frustration with the barriers that keep our species apart, their hope for deeper connection, their sadness at being forced to remain strangers. She paused, gathering her thoughts. But I also experienced something else. Through Zephyr's memories, I saw the truth about how this prohibition came to exist. I witnessed the fear and political calculation that motivated it. The restriction was never about our safety. It was about maintaining the power structure that keeps species isolated and suspicious of each other. Echo rose from the Kythera section, their crystal formation blazing with brilliant light. The Kythera delegation confirms Dr. Chen's testimony. We formally request permission to share our memories of these events with the assembled representatives. The request sent shockwaves through the chamber. Direct memory sharing was an incredibly intimate form of communication, one that most species found overwhelming, but it was also impossible to fake or distort. The hegemony objects, Counselor Vex declared immediately. Memory sharing is a form of mental manipulation. It cannot be considered reliable evidence. The Luminary Collective supports the request, Flux announced, their light patterns shifting to indicate strong agreement. Truth cannot be found through words alone when words have been used to obscure reality. The debate that followed was intense and sometimes heated. Species after species declared their positions on memory sharing, on the validity of the prohibition, on the broader questions of contact policy that the incident had raised. Sarah listened with growing amazement as beings from across the galaxy argued passionately about the principles she had stumbled into. Finally, the Arbiter called for order. The chamber will experience a limited harmonic resonance, allowing all present to share in the relevant memories of the Kythera delegates. Participation is voluntary. Those who wish to experience true understanding may remain. Those who prefer the safety of separation may withdraw. Sarah watched with fascination as roughly half the assembly chose to leave the chamber. The hegemony faction departed almost entirely, along with several other conservative species. But the remaining representatives, including many she hadn't expected, stayed to experience the shared memories. The resonance field built slowly, much gentler than what Sarah had experienced during the crisis at Aurora. As the Kythera delegates shared their memories, she felt the consciousness of hundreds of beings opening to new understanding. Through the shared experience, the assembled representatives witnessed the loneliness and frustration that the contact prohibitions had created. They experienced the joy and wonder of genuine connection between species. Most importantly, they saw the political machinations that had created the restrictions in the first place. When the resonance field faded, the chamber was filled with a profound silence. Many of the representatives sat in apparent shock, processing what they had experienced. Others wept openly, moved by emotions they had never felt before. "Now you understand," Echo said simply, "why some of us believe that the time has come for change." The Arbiter's form shifted to new patterns that Sarah had learned indicated deep contemplation. The evidence presented raises fundamental questions about the nature of interspecies contact and the principles that should govern such relationships. This tribunal will recess to consider its findings. As the formal session ended, Sarah found herself surrounded by representatives from dozens of species. Some wanted to express support for her actions. Others peppered her with questions about human culture and consciousness. A few simply wanted to touch her hand, curious about the physical sensation that had started everything. "You've changed the galaxy," Zephyr said when they finally managed to reach her through the crowd. The containment fields had been dropped entirely during the mediation, allowing true contact for the first time since their original connection. "We've changed it," Sarah corrected, taking her friend's crystalline hand in hers. The familiar warmth of connection flowed between them, carrying with it a sense of completion and hope. "What happens now?" she asked. Zephyr's colors shifted to patterns of gold and silver. What she had learned indicated hope mixed with uncertainty. "Now we discover whether the galaxy is ready to choose connection over separation, understanding over fear, love over politics." Around them, representatives from dozens of species continued to mingle and interact in ways that would have been unthinkable just weeks before. The sight filled Sarah with a cautious optimism. Change was never easy, especially on a galactic scale, but looking at the connections being formed around her, she began to believe that it might actually be possible. The question was whether those who benefited from the old system would allow the new one to flourish, or whether they would fight to preserve the barriers that had kept the galaxy divided for so long. 1 year later, Sarah stood on the observation deck of New Harmony Station, watching ships from dozens of species dock at the massive structure that had grown from the original mediation chamber. The galaxy had changed in ways both subtle and profound since that day, when she had first touched Zephyr's hand. The Arbiter's final ruling had been more complex than anyone had expected. Rather than simply condemning or exonerating Sarah's actions, the tribunal had declared the entire system of contact protocols to be fundamentally flawed. The ancient protocols had been invoked to establish new principles for interspecies relations, principles based on voluntary connection rather than enforced separation. The Aurora Accords, as they had come to be known, established a new framework for galactic civilization. Species could choose their level of interaction, from minimal contact to full cultural exchange. No longer would fear and political calculation determine how beings related to each other across the void between worlds. The changes hadn't come without cost. The hegemony faction had withdrawn from the council entirely, establishing their own alliance of species that preferred isolation. Several border conflicts had erupted as old political arrangements crumbled and new ones formed. There had been moments when Sarah feared that her simple act of connection had actually destabilized the galaxy, rather than improving it. But watching the daily routine of New Harmony Station, She knew the changes had been worth it. Humans worked alongside Kythera in the research laboratories. Luminary beings shared knowledge with wanderer explorers in the cultural exchange centers. Species that had been strangers for millennia were discovering common ground and mutual respect. Regrets? Zephyr asked, approaching from behind. Sarah had learned to recognize their footsteps, the particular harmonic frequency that their crystalline structure created when moving. Sometimes, Sarah admitted honestly, when I see the news reports about conflicts in the outer systems, or when I think about the species that chose isolation rather than risk connection, I wonder if I did the right thing. Zephyr moved to stand beside her at the viewing port, their crystal formations shifting to gentle blues and greens. And then, Sarah smiled, touching her friend's hand. The connection that flowed between them was no longer unique or forbidden. Throughout the station, beings from different species shared similar bonds, creating a web of understanding that spanned star systems. And then I remember why we did this in the first place, she said, not for political gain or scientific advancement, but because two conscious beings wanted to truly know each other. Through their shared connection, Sarah felt Zephyr's memories of the past year. The joy of finally being able to communicate fully with humans, the wonder of experiencing new forms of art and music and literature, the deep satisfaction of working on projects that would have been impossible under the old system of separation. But she also felt the sadness that lingered, the knowledge that not every species had chosen to embrace the new possibilities. The Kythera, like many others, had family members and friends among the species that had withdrawn into isolation. The galaxy was larger and more connected than ever before, but it was also more divided. Do you think they'll ever change their minds? Sarah asked, thinking of the hegemony worlds and their rigid adherence to the old ways. Some will, Zephyr replied with the certainty that came from their species' ability to perceive emotional truth. Fear is powerful, but curiosity is stronger. Eventually, the children of the isolated worlds will wonder what they're missing. When they do, we'll be here. A soft chime indicated an incoming communication. Sarah activated the viewing screen to see Captain Santos from Contact Station Beta 7, now serving as the liaison between human space and the new Galactic Confederation. Sarah, we've got something you need to see, Santos said, her expression a mixture of excitement and apprehension. Long-range sensors are picking up a massive fleet approaching from the galactic rim. Unknown configuration completely unlike anything in our databases. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. First contact with a new species was always significant, but in the current political climate, it could be either an opportunity or a crisis. How massive? She asked. 300 ships minimum, and Sarah, they're broadcasting a message. It's an old galactic, the formal language used for first contact protocols. They're specifically requesting to speak with the human who broke the barriers and the Kythera who shared truth. Sarah and Zephyr exchanged glances. Their shared connection, carrying a mixture of anticipation and concern. Somehow word of the Aurora incident had reached beings beyond the known galaxy. What's the message? Zephyr asked. Santos's expression grew more serious. They say they've been watching our galaxy for millennia, waiting for a sign that we were ready to join something larger. They claim that what happened between you two and the changes that followed proved that our civilization has finally evolved beyond the fear-based isolation that characterizes younger species. Sarah sank into a nearby chair, overwhelmed by the implications. She had thought that changing galactic civilization was the end of the story that had begun with her simple question to Zephyr. But apparently it had only been the beginning. They want to meet with us, she said. It wasn't really a question. They're requesting formal first contact protocols, Santos confirmed. But they want the meetings to take place at New Harmony Station, and they want you and Zephyr to serve as primary liaison representatives. Through their connection, Sarah felt Zephyr's excitement and determination. Her friend had always been curious about what lay beyond their known galaxy, and the prospect of meeting beings from that vast unknown filled them with wonder. We accept, Sarah said, making the decision for both of them. When do they arrive? 3 days, Santos replied. Sarah, these beings claim to represent something called the Confluence, an alliance of galaxies that spans distances we can barely comprehend. If they're telling the truth, this contact could change everything again. After the communication ended, Sarah and Zephyr stood in comfortable silence, watching the stars beyond the station. The same stars that had once seemed impossibly distant now felt like neighbors. And somewhere beyond them, new friends were approaching. "Are you afraid?" Zephyr asked, echoing the question Sarah had posed to them a year ago in the laboratory. Sarah considered the question seriously. Yes, she was afraid. Afraid of the responsibility, afraid of making the wrong choices, afraid of the unknown consequences that might follow. But stronger than the fear was something else. "No," she said finally, squeezing Zephyr's crystalline hand. "I'm not afraid, because whatever happens next, we'll face it together, all of us." Around them, New Harmony Station continued its daily routine of impossible connections and unlikely friendships. Beings from dozens of worlds worked and played and learned together, proving every day that the barriers between species were artificial constructs that could be overcome with courage and compassion. In 3 days, that small community of connected souls would meet beings from beyond their galaxy. The conversation that began with a simple touch between human and alien was about to expand to encompass wonders they could barely imagine. But for now, Sarah was content to stand with her friend and watch the stars, knowing that somewhere in that vast darkness, other beings were traveling toward them with hope and curiosity, rather than fear and suspicion. The galaxy had learned to reach across the void between worlds. Soon, they would learn to reach across the void between galaxies as well.